Please join me in welcoming your 2013 Fireside Chat PubCon speakers, the Honorable Clay Jenkins and the Honorable Ed. Gentlemen, I thought we would begin with a broad question about the magnitude of the infrastructure problem we face in the state of Texas. This has been a legislative session in which we've heard repeatedly that the infrastructure problems we face on issues like transportation and water principally are enormous, that they're so enormous they've gotten to the point where we can no longer ignore them. And even in what is destined every session to be an austerity budget, we have to find money to finally address these problems. I wonder if you agree that these problems are as enormous from your perspective at the local level as we all think they are and have been told they are, or is that primarily hype? Judge Jenkins.
Sure. I was pleased with some of the things I heard the governor say today, but if you listen to the governor's lunch speech, he talked about $41 million spent on infrastructure for transportation over the next few decades to fund the 2035 plan, which will be due in, I'm not great at math, but I'm pretty sure that's 22 years. To fund that is $1.2 trillion. And he's talking about $41 billion. So we've got to find different ways in what we're doing. I think it is an enormous problem that cannot be solved with the rainy day fund, or it's this idea of the sales tax swap.
Yeah.
That is not good enough to get it done because you're talking about the incremental. They're all good tools in the toolbox, but yeah, the problem is far more enormous than what we're putting on.
Tell me from the Dallas County perspective how you look out at the area you represent and see that the problem is as bad as we think it is. What tangible evidence do you have that the problem is of the size and scope that we hear?
Well, you've got gridlock. You've got people voting with their feet on where they're putting their corporate headquarters. Dallas County now has pretty strong corporate competition on their corporate headquarters with the town of Frisco that's 19 miles away because of the housing stock around Frisco. You've got problems with congestion mitigation.
Yep.
And air quality. So you've got the number one cause of absenteeism from the DISD is childhood asthma. So,
which you tie back indirectly to.
Yeah, I'll give you the latest example of the human cost of this. Yesterday, before coming here, I was in a meeting with Hope Andrade, and
former Secretary of State.
Former Secretary of State. She's now taken over the Workforce Commission. I was called on my cell phone right as the meeting began. We were up on a stage, and I said, I've got to excuse myself. Our Emergency Operations Center has been activated, and I've got to go. We've had a possible mass casualty event. So go to the Emergency Operations Center. We've had a bus wreck.
We all now know about, right?
It's at a bottleneck on 161, the George Bush,
yep.
Where we've got toll roads on both sides, but we have not yet done these 2 miles. Well, we've talked about, NT10, I've talked about finding a way to fund those 2 miles. But the driver, apparently driver area, had hit the cones going into the smaller bottleneck, turned the bus over, killed 2 people, severed the arm of one, and we had about 30 critically injured. And so one of my jobs, of course, as Ed knows, is I go to the incident command at our local hospital. They're taken to Parkland Hospital, our county hospital, talk to those folks, talk to our surgeons who are prepping to go take care of these folks. And then I've got to go talk to these families who are waiting to find out what happened to their relatives. These are mostly senior citizens who are going to the Choctaw Casino. So that puts those crying people, that puts another face on this. What we're doing by not spending an appropriate amount of money on infrastructure it's hurting us in just so many areas.
Yeah, Judge, Judge Jenkins talks about traffic. He talks about air pollution. He talks about all the consequences that are visible. You see the same thing, I'm imagining, where you sit.
Absolutely. And before I start, I have to make one minor addition to the bio you read.
Yes.
Yes, I did get my master's from the University of Texas, but I got it from the OBJ School of Public Affairs.
So we need
this is kind of coming home here.
Well.
So having said that, transportation, you said, has it finally reached the critical point?
Yeah.
No, it reached it about a decade ago.
Right.
And we have to understand that. Transportation infrastructure, as I said today on the panel, it's the key to our economic growth. We can talk about the Texas miracle all we want, but it's going to go away if we don't build infrastructure. And the best example, and this is one where it actually worked, in Harris County, the Grand Parkway, which was drafted in legislation in the mid-'80s by me. And when I moved back in 2003, it still wasn't anywhere near being built.
Yep.
But ExxonMobil, when they decided to move their North American headquarters, they said, we'll put it in Harris County, but you've got to guarantee us that the Grand Parkway is going to be built in time.
Right.
So we had the rights to build the Grand Parkway under Senate Bill 792. We got with TxDOT,
Yep.
gave it back to them, worked out an agreement. It is built, and the only reason ExxonMobil is moving their North American headquarters is because we were able to do that.
Yeah.
If we're not able to do that in the future, all those types of things go away.
Yeah.
Having said that, I've also, this is going to be like a presidential debate. You can ask us whatever you want, but we're going to answer the questions
That's
Yo.
fine.
we want you to ask.
New rules.
I have a 16-year-old. I experience that every day, actually. That's fine.
The one thing that has become amazing to me about transportation infrastructure, it has never been a partisan issue.
Right. These roads aren't Democratic or Republican roads.
In the past. And that's why at the federal level, frequently, you look at Norm Mineta, he was Secretary of Transportation.
Democrat under George Bush, Ray LaHood, Republican under Barack Obama.
Right.
That's
And
it.
Mineta was under two different
Right.
presidents because we have to do it. And
Right.
so people like you have got to engage and really talk about the legislators, and there's got to be a price to pay
Right.
for elected officials who don't step up. and
Judge,
do it.
I'm hearing you and I'm hearing Judge Jenkins talk about we need money to make these problems occur. We'll talk about the various funding mechanisms in a few minutes, but I'm thinking of the public education debate this session when we're here repeatedly, you can't just throw money at the problem. Money is not the only solution. It sounds like on transportation, it may be that you can throw money at the problem and that money may be, if not the only solution, then the ingredient that is essential to making this problem go away.
Sure, it takes money. I mean, you can't build a highway without money.
Yeah,
So the question is, where does the money come from?
right.
Clay and I were talking beforehand with several other people. I'm forever having folks come down and say, DFW is getting a lot more money than you are in the Harris County area. Well, that's because...
That's, you know, that is dynamic leadership on the part of the county judge. That's what that is. Right.
That's not the right answer.
Imagine that.
He is a dynamic leader.
Yeah.
But the real answer is they're playing catch up with us.
Is that it? Yep.
Because years ago, the Harris County Commissioners Court created the Harris County Toll Road Authority.
Yep.
So we have Beltway 8, we have the West Park Tollway, we have Hardy, we have the managed lanes on I-10. Thanks to TxDOT, we've got 290 underway.
Yep.
So we've done a lot of things for ourselves. In DFW, and I don't want to talk about that area because it's not mine, but they have the NTTA, which is a multi-headed kind of operation, and it's harder to get
Yep.
a grip on. Harris County Toll Road Authority is run by Harris County Commissioners Court, and so we just do it, and it's
It's
worked.
a little bit more streamlined process.
And it has been more
Right.
streamlined.
You brought up tolls. Let me ask the both of you, Clay, you, Judge Jenkins, you first. So I'm a citizen of this state. I pay taxes, and I assume that my taxes go to pay for roads. Then I'm being asked to pay for toll roads, and it feels to me and to a bunch of other people like double taxation. That if my taxes go to pay for roads, why do I then have to turn around and pay a second time to avoid the kind of congestion that you're describing? That, I acknowledge, is a facile argument, and it's the facile argument made by people who don't want to pay tolls. I'll tell you, I now pay tolls willingly because I'm so frustrated by the situation I find in Houston and Dallas and elsewhere that I've decided to give up and just lean in, go with it, right? But you understand that that's the argument that a lot of people make. Why are we having to do this? And why is that seem to be the first solution that people turn to in the absence of other revenue sources? Can you talk about that?
Sure. It's a pretty simple political situation. In 1993, we made a decision to rely heavily on tolls. That was a decision that the people who made have been getting reelected ever since then.
Right.
And that's the trajectory that our state is on. And if people don't like that, they need to vote for somebody different. But what I do is I look for ways within that are true to my beliefs, which are democratic beliefs, to work with my Republican counterparts to find a way to fund our projects, because if we wait around for this state to pay for free roads, they're not going to come.
Are you anti-toll road, Judge?
I'd be anti-toll road if I had a choice, but I don't have a choice.
But the fact is, you don't have a choice.
Yeah.
Right. And Judge, you feel the same way?
Well, no, I'm actually fairly pro-toll road.
You are pro-toll road.
Because one of the worst things that happened to us is we allowed the debate to be between toll roads and free roads. There's never been a free road. A free road's always been paid for by the gasoline tax.
You either pay before or you pay after,
yeah,
right?
So, and that's a mistake those of us in office made. Ironically, a lot of the, and I hate using labels like conservative or liberal, but ironically, a lot of the new so-called conservatives don't like toll roads. But in fact, toll roads are the epitome of a conservative approach in that a user fee, the user pays for the road.
It's literally pay as you go.
It's pay as you go. Right. So the problem we're having in Harris County is, I think it's not a problem, I think it's a benefit. We throw off excess cash off our toll road system. We then, as the county, can use that money to build some of these other roads that are not tolled that feed into the toll road system. If we didn't have the toll roads, we'd then have to increase the property tax that much if we were going to build those roads.
Yeah. In some ways, it's the only way, in the absence of other revenue or a more predictable stream of revenue from the state, that's how you get money to build roads.
Yeah, and if I could take one more minute,
Please.
People need to understand about Harris County versus Dallas, and this is not a good, bad thing. This is a fact. I think Dallas County, what is it, 95% of it is incorporated, roughly, something like that.
Probably more than that. We have 6,000 people living in our unincorporated areas.
Okay. In Harris County, of the 4.2 million people, 1.6 million live in unincorporated Harris County.
Right.
The only level of government they have is county government or municipal utility district.
Right.
That means all those roads, all those streets go on the county road log, and they're our responsibility. To put that in perspective, if those 1.6 million were a city, it would be the 5th largest city in the U.S.
If let's say that again, if the unincorporated part of Harris County were a city unto itself, it would be the 5th largest city in the U.S.
Right behind Houston, just ahead of Philadelphia. And by the next census, we will pass the city of Houston because they're not annexing anymore.
Yeah, so the responsibility is enormous that you all have.
We have just a different circumstance.
You mentioned the gas tax, Judge. There has been at least one serious discussion so far this legislative session about the possibility of raising the gasoline tax proposed by Senator Kevin Eltife, the former mayor of Tyler, now representing Tyler and parts of the state. The idea is that constitutionally, 3/4 of that gasoline tax increase would go to transportation, 1/4 to public ed. Tax is a dirty word, I thought. This is a Republican senator talking about the possibility of raising taxes. Is the problem that dire that it now has forced Republicans to talk about raising taxes in public?
You know, I don't think that's an indication of a dire problem. I think it's an indication that the gasoline tax wasn't structured right in the first place. It was never indexed for inflation. And it certainly never considered that cars were going to get to be more fuel efficient over the course of time. I think what has to happen, we need a comprehensive transportation policy and a comprehensive approach to funding it. It's a little disingenuous to say we're going to end the diversions from Fund 6.
Yeah, we'll come to the governor's speech.
No, this isn't about his speech, but this is about...
Generally speaking, the question of ending fund diversions.
Because you still have to then go to general revenue to make up the money
that you've taken away.
Right.
So. But on the gasoline tax specifically, is that something that you, as a good Republican, as somebody who has been in this war of ideas over how to fund things properly for many, many years, could you get yourself to support an increase in the gasoline tax?
I've been on record for increase the gasoline tax. I
you
voted
for you fade the heat politically.
When I was in the legislature, I voted for one. I mean, you have to build transportation. It costs money.
Yeah.
There's no way around that.
Right. Judge, if the Republican county judge of Harris County is willing to support a tax increase, surely you are.
Sure, I'd support a vehicle miles travel tax, increase in the gas tax. A simpler one that Republicans might be able to agree on is just, don't increase it right now, but index it so when gas goes up, it goes up. But I don't see any, I appreciate Senator Eltif's position, but I don't see any support for that in his own party. So
well, Chairman Williams of the Finance Committee last week quietly, or this week, quietly supported Senator Eltife on the gasoline tax, but the lieutenant governor has said basically that the gasoline tax will come up to the Senate floor, come up for a vote on the Senate floor over his dead body. The likelihood of it being considered seriously is not there. So is it a moot point to talk about it, or should we be talking about it anyway?
I don't know if it's a moot point to talk about it. I think it was Representative Darby said today that the business community, citizens, influence leaders have to start demanding things from our legislature. Right now what we have, and I see it on the local level too, sometimes the tail wags the dog. Yeah. And the far viewpoints in our primaries tend to outweigh things. Well, I'm in a county that's now a Democratic supermajority, so we have to guard against that. But we've got to come together. I think I talked to the business community. I was talking to the head of logistics at HEB today, and the head of the transportation, the trucking industry today. And they're not opposed to paying for transportation. They want to make sure it's done in such a way that it doesn't give a competitive advantage to another sector or a competitor. Right. But they want good roads. People, business needs reliable transportation, reliable electricity, and reliable water.
As you all have said, it gets back to economic development.
And they also need an educated workforce.
Right.
And we're not talking about that at this point, but that's another thing that we're missing.
Right.
Yeah.
Judge, I was interested on this discussion of taxes. There's the question of whether to raise taxes, but there's also been, at least the governor in his State of the State address, proposed returning $1.8 billion to taxpayers in tax relief, assuming that times are better, we have a surplus, we have more money to spend, that maybe some of the additional money that we have available to us should go back to taxpayers in the form of tax relief. And I read a Patty Hart story in the Houston Chronicle about a month ago where you said, I think we should not give tax relief back to taxpayers, that if you put it to people, we ought to take that $1.8 billion, and instead of doing tax relief, we ought to put it towards transportation. So not only are you for a tax increase, but you're opposed to tax cuts.
Well, I don't know that I would phrase it quite like that.
I'm sure you wouldn't.
But in fact, you didn't quote Patty Hart completely, and we'll leave it at that because.
Was it worse than I said, or better?
Yeah, it was worse, because the truth of the matter is, I'm sitting when that, and I've known Governor Perry since 1985. He was freshman Democrat on the House on the House Energy Committee when I chaired it. And he's a friend, and so I'd certainly give him advice whenever he asks. Right. And sometimes I give it when he doesn't ask. But in the case of saying $1.8 billion that we've taken in, there's no mechanism for giving it back. So that's why I said that idea is madness.
It's more of a rhetorical device on his part.
You cannot do it.
A practical proposal.
And I even raised the point, it's raised through sales tax. How do you give a sales tax rebate to people? Right. I mean, that includes everybody that buys anything in the state of Texas. You just can't do it.
But leaving the practical part of it aside, Judge, your point was, I thought you were quoted saying this, that I'd rather see $1.8 billion go to transportation specifically.
Well, we're having this whole conference. Everybody today has said we've got to find ways to get funding for transportation. Right. Why? That's $1.8 billion that we need to use there.
Let me ask you about two other proposals that have been floated by key members of the legislature. Chairman Williams, again of the Woodlands, who chairs the Senate Finance Committee, Republican, has now last session and this session proposed raising the car registration fee, which he says is actually quite low compared to the registration fee in other states. And over 10 years, the amount of money generated by the proposed increase that he's put forward would really be a couple $20 billion, 25. I mean, you get a lot of money, actually, if you see this all the way out to the out years. So what about that?
I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. The legislature needs to come up with a comprehensive funding approach.
Of which these kinds of fee increases may be a part.
May be a part.
Yeah.
But they need to do it and really, bite the proverbial bullet and get it done, and not keep going back every session and say, well, maybe we're going to do this little piece, maybe we're going to do that little piece, because the commissioners over at TxDOT have to have some assurance that they're going to have a fund to work with. Yeah. And we've got to do that. Yeah.
Judge, you okay with the registration fee increase?
TxDOT needs about $4 billion a year at a minimum. And that doesn't even fund the 2035 plan. That doesn't get you close to doing that, but it can be a tool in the toolbox. it's not my favorite tool because it's a very regressive tax.
Right.
It's the same registration fee for the person who is driving a 15-year-old car and making minimum wage
Right.
it is for the first person who's driving a $150,000 Bentley.
Right. Doesn't make it. Yeah. But there it is.
And that's problematic to me. But
Yeah. So then the other proposal that's been floated is by Speaker Strauss, is to increase the fee to renew your driver's license, which is actually pretty inexpensive right now. Again, take that fee up, raise a bunch of money. Same answer basically on that. Part of an any and all plan to fund transportation.
I think the plan just has to be comprehensive. And Clay mentioned at the very beginning, everybody knows the real way to get to it ultimately is to get away from the gasoline tax, because eventually we're going to go to natural gas fueled vehicles and electric vehicles and other things. We need to get to a vehicle miles traveled.
I agree with that.
But the problem is measuring.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go out of the state, how do you measure? Because it should be as simple as looking at the odometer and say, this is how far you went, this is what your tax is.
You both mentioned the governor a couple times. I wondered if you'd give us your reaction to the governor's speech today. Did you think the governor had any proposals on funding transportation that you could support? Or for the sake of drama tonight, let me keep my fingers crossed that you oppose the governor. I have no idea which way you're going to go, but let's see what happens. Judge, what did you think about the governor's speech?
I like it when he looks and says judge, and we're both judges.
And
You
we're both
both look
judges.
up, actually. Judge, what did you think about the governor's speech?
He said one thing that is pretty intriguing to me, and that is talking about the historically low interest rates that we have.
Right.
And this is something to look at. It's not something that I'm advocating for tonight. But Richard Fisher, and by the way, all good ideas are stolen. So I stole this idea from Richard Fisher via Jeff Austin.
Okay.
And the idea is this: we look at the possibility of Texas, with our good relative credit worthiness, floating out what we would call Texas century bonds. Yeah. And the caveat, the thing that we've really got to guard against, is that we're not just kicking the can down the road and limiting the next generation's opportunities. But I've talked to several people, First Southwest, who's one of our sponsors here, some of their folks about that, and there may be ways to arbitrage that and to hedge that in such a way in this interest rate environment that could make sense. And that's something that we should study. And he walked up to the edge of the water on that, and that's something worth studying.
You don't share some of the concerns, Judge, that people have about debt. Senator Eltife, again, to cite him, says if we're going to go into debt to build roads, we may as well just bite the bullet and raise taxes, because ultimately what we're doing is funding it now or funding it later, and the later part leaves the bill to be paid by our kids and grandkids.
No, I would if it were up to me, and I think if it were up to a lot of members of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party that are in the middle, we would look at things like vehicle miles traveled. Yeah. And we would think about future generations.
Preferable to debt.
That would be preferable to debt. What I'm saying is, if with the tools that we have in the toolbox, it may be worth looking at historically low interest rates when the federal government can't go out that long. Yeah. And when we know that the monetary policy is likely to pull back at the end of 2014, and so we're going to see the rates go up, it may be worth looking at that. They're looking at the positives and the negatives of that. So that's.
Judge, our Lyceum brother Phil Wilson, who is the executive director of TxDOT, I believe testified at the Senate last month or the month before that TxDOT has almost maxed out its bonding capacity. The question of TxDOT being able to amass debt in perpetuity is really a moot point, because we know that they're pretty soon going to run into their cap.
Well, perhaps, but I mean, those kind of things can be changed.
They can be monkeyed with.
They can be monkeyed with.
Right.
Since you were going to let me off the hook on what I thought of the governor's speech.
No, I'm not done yet. I'm coming back.
Then I'll go ahead and dive in, because
dive right
I know
in,
you're
please.
going to come back.
Yeah. What did you think, Judge? What did you think of the governor's speech?
I thought it was too short.
It's too short.
I mean, basically.
Go on.
Well, I mean, this was a conference for transportation infrastructure.
Right.
And he did break some new ground that may have been lost on most of the audience, but wasn't lost on those who follow the legislature, and that is the idea of taking the increase in the registration fee and applying it. I don't know that those numbers add up, but I guess what struck me more, and this is a criticism, I guess, there was no mention of rail, there was no mention of ports, there was no mention of intercoastal waterway, there was no mention of transportation infrastructure. It was just about highways, so I interpreted his speech, rightly or wrongly, as being directed toward members of the legislature about what they're considering right now.
Among the things they're considering is a withdrawal of several $1 billion from the rainy day fund.
Right.
And, yeah.
I mean, because it was not a broad-based, and I think he does have ideas about all those things, but
he didn't share them today.
He didn't share them, and so I think it was a very pointed speech.
Does the withdrawal of, I guess, $3.5 billion, is that what Chairman Williams is talking about? Whatever the current number is from the rainy day fund to jumpstart a transportation plan, seem like enough to you? I mean, what Judge Jenkins talked about in terms of the magnitude of the problem, of the need financially, $3 billion is a fly on the behind of an elephant, relatively speaking, on a problem this large. Is that still something you think we should do?
Better an elephant than a donkey, but
You're welcome for that one. Yeah.
well, it's a one-time short-term fix.
Yeah.
And
that's all that it is.
That's right.
But better than nothing.
Better than nothing, absolutely.
You for the rainy day fund withdrawal, Judge?
The first thing I'd do if I were going to withdraw from the rainy day fund is I'd restore $5 billion in cuts for school children. As a father of a 7-year-old, I'm kind of biased that the next generation is the most important thing. But if we're not going to do that, I think transportation and water are the two most pressing needs. And I'm for having a rainy day fund, but for God's sakes, I mean, I think it's raining, folks. I mean, I think
this would be the time to do it.
Yeah, I have to add, and I really don't want to get into naming names, but over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, I have heard the most conservative state senators that exist all say we've got to do something about the gasoline tax before they get to the session. And then they get to the session and it all goes away.
What do you think it is? Is it the politics of our time where you can't have a serious conversation about the subject of taxes that keeps them from being able to go into the session and do that?
You know, I assume so.
Yeah.
But part of the problem, and not to get us off into the whole politics, if you look at the Harris County delegation, there are 25 members from the Texas House from Harris County, which, by the way, is more than or west of I-35. Of those 25 seats, there's only one that's even remotely competitive. So the Democrats all run this way and the Republicans all run this way. Whereas Clay and I, even though he's in a county that's a little bit less marginal than mine,
I won by 49.8% landslide last time.
What competition forces you to do in elections is actually have a plan.
Well, it's not even what forces us, it's what ought to happen in government. We really should be talking to each other because something like transportation, even education, those are not, shouldn't be partisan issues.
Judge, the other thing that the governor talked about today, I know, was the idea of taking funds dedicated to transportation, dedicated funds and moving them to transportation. But isn't the whole question of fund diversions generally taking funds that were intended for this purpose away from whatever they're being spent on now and back to the original purpose? You create a hole over here.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
It's a pig and a snake. When the governor talked about taking the money that was going to fund the DPS budget and putting it back to its original purpose in the state of the state, the DPS budget is not going to be zeroed out. We're going to have to go find that money somewhere else. So I want to understand better. I'm assuming I just don't understand how this works as well as all of you who are in these offices, that fund diversions don't seem to solve the problem. They simply shift the money from here to here and create a hole over here.
I think all of us hopefully could agree that there should not be fund diversions.
Right.
If you have a fund set up for education, it ought to go to education. If it's set up for transportation, it ought to go to transportation.
Right.
We've got to unwind a lot of the things that have been built over the years.
Right.
And in doing that, you're right. DPS is still going to be funded, so by saying we're going to end diversions to DPS, for example, then the legislature's got to find something else to fund DPS with.
It's not going to cut the budget, Judge, in the course of doing that.
That's right. I think you understand it probably better than most of our elected officials do. You can't, because what we got with these, like you take the transportation money, some of the diversions go towards DPS. So you're not going to not fund DPS.
Right.
So it's a good soundbite, and I do agree with Ed. We need to stop diversions. We will have to do it gradually, because if you put things into a fund, they ought to go for that thing.
Right.
But again, those, I would agree with what Ed said, that the governor's speech was short on some specifics that we need, but also it's short if we're going to find a way to solve transportation.
Yeah.
And we're going to have 2035 plans, and soon a 2040 plan, et cetera, then we need people's plans as to how we're going to fund that.
Yeah.
I mean, it may not be things that we're going to be able to do, but at least we need to hear people's ideas.
Let's have a plan.
And we need that from our leader. Our leaders need to give us that plan.
Right.
Well, and let me give you an example. There's a rail fund that was created, but there's no money in it.
Right.
Well, in Harris County, we've built Loop 610, we've built Beltway 8, Grand Parkway is being built. There's not going to be another loop, because that would be all the way out to San Antonio by then. We're going to have to start funding rail projects.
Yeah.
And in fact, the Panama Canal Working Group that I chaired, one of the ideas came up, if the federal government won't fund the intercoastal waterway, then maybe TxDOT treats that as a highway.
Part of their purview.
And they take it over because it's so critical to the state.
Right.
But then we want to be sure that the feds don't just take that money and run off somewhere else with it.
Let me ask you, I know we're getting to the point where we want to have questions from the audience. Let me ask you a question, less as a journalist interviewing you than as a Texan. Why can't I hop on a high-speed train to get to Houston or to Dallas? Preferably with Wi-Fi that would allow me to use those hours productively. There seems to have always been a need for high-speed rail, and there's even been an open discussion about the prospect of high-speed rail, but what you always hear is that the lobbyists for the airlines have killed high-speed rail. I don't know if that's true, but tell me what's going on. I mean, you represent Dallas County. Southwest Airlines, a great corporate citizen. They're effectively the Greyhound bus of Texas, right, in the way that they operate. But can't we have Southwest Airlines and American for that matter, and also high-speed rail? Wouldn't we all prefer to have those options? Why are we not getting high-speed rail?
I think we would, and I think in this regard, Southwest may be getting a bad rap. I had dinner on last Wednesday with Mr. Kelly, Gary Kelly.
Gary Kelly, CEO of Southwest.
Southwest. I think if you look at what Southwest has now become the largest domestic carrier in the United States. They're based out of Dallas. Of course, they were created out of Love Field. Yeah, Dallas. All right.
And I think we all love Southwest.
And we all love
There's no
Southwest,
question about that.
But where's Southwest's profit is in loading people up and keeping them in the air on the longer routes.
Right.
So Southwest has, and we'll take them at their word. They've told Texas the Railway that they are neutral on this project as long as that thing doesn't land at Love Field.
Yeah.
And so, and I think Doug Parker and his new airline will be, or American Airlines will be the same way. So I think you'll see that. I think you'll see it in the future. I think in the very near future, you'll have a connection between the Metroplex and Houston.
Well, Judge, what has kept us from having high-speed rail up to this point?
Since you introduced me at the beginning as the veteran,
Yeah.
which tells everybody I'm old, I can give
Long
you
memory.
Long memory. I can give you a bit of a historical perspective, because when the German companies and the French companies wanted to come build high-speed rail, they hired all the greatest lobbyists in the world, and it was Southwest Airlines at that time that killed the Texas Triangle, Houston, DFW, San Antonio. That morphed then into the Texas T-bone, which was around for a long time as a concept, because rather than having 3 sides to build, you'd only have 2 sides. The problem is, if you're in Houston, do you really want to go to Temple to go to Dallas? And so that didn't work out so well, and that never came to fruition. The latest thing that Robert Eccles is working on with Japan Railways involves the BNSF corridor, potentially, and it's a straight shot between Houston and DFW area. That is one of the great pairs of the world that should be high-speed rail.
Yeah.
So hopefully it will happen. The problem is going to be, as I said today, interconnectedness. if you just run a high-speed train back and forth, you've got to do something with it once you get it to either end. We can handle it on our end. I think there's going to be questions at the DFW as to whether it goes to Dallas or Fort Worth or to the airport.
Right.
But since it's going to be largely, well, but both cost a lot of money.
Right.
You know, and it's ultimately going to be up to the operator as to
Where
where they want it to go.
Well, I agree with that.
All right, so here we have a conference about infrastructure, and I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative for the last question and ask you both about Medicaid. I've got because I have two county judges here, one of whom has very publicly outed himself as pro-expansion of Medicaid, and one I'd like to draw out whatever side he takes on this.
Won't be that hard.
We are engaged. We're engaged in a statewide debate, and I think it's a healthy debate over health care in this state. We have 28.8% of our population uninsured, and there is, as you know, a political hot potato in the form of the possible expansion of Medicaid that has defined almost every political conversation for the last few months. Guys, tell us where you think, from the county perspective, we should be.
Hey, I'm going to let Ed answer that, but I'm going to tell you, you don't have to draw Ed out.
Okay, good.
You know, Ed Emmett.
Then we'll get to questions faster.
Taking
That's
a
good.
courageous stand on this. I'll let him start.
Judge.
You need to read more press.
I didn't know there actually was press other than the Tribune. Is
Well,
there press?
Well, in that case, then the Tribune needs to cover me more.
Okay. That judge I will cop to. That's
because,
fine, actually, yeah.
Because at my State of the County speech in February,
Yeah.
I said we have to expand Medicaid.
Right.
Does it need reforming? Of course.
Right.
And I'll tell you why in a minute.
Please.
But then Judge Jenkins and I appeared jointly before the House Appropriations Committee saying they needed to expand Medicaid.
Right.
Because as a county judge, and by the way, Fort Bend County, I'm told, just the last week or two, that county to the southwest of Harris
Right.
County.
Liberal bastion.
Right. Voted unanimously, their commissioners court, to call for expansion of Medicaid. So if you're a county judge, certainly, or in my position as a county judge, I won't speak for any others, indigent health care is our responsibility.
Yes.
The same people are going to get sick whether or not you expand Medicaid. Currently, too many of them show up at the emergency rooms and they use that as their primary health care. What we're trying to set up under the Section 1115 waiver process, which Texas has already gotten, is a system where we will move to neighborhood clinics establishing medical homes and preventive care. That to me makes all the sense in the world. It's a better outcome for the patient and it's a better deal for the taxpayer, quite frankly. But that's got to be paid for by somebody. Right now it's paid for by local taxpayers. Mm-hmm. If Medicaid comes in and if the numbers are right that the state can spend $50.4 million and draw down $4 billion over the next biennium, why would we not do that? And to those in my party who argue that, well, but it's all a ruse and they're going to take it back later on.
And leave you with the bill. Right.
We've got the bill now. So we're right back to where we are.
Judge,
so take their $4 billion in the meantime.
Just take it while you can get it. Judge, the argument that Governor Perry and others have made about this is that the money comes with strings. And we don't particularly want the federal government to tell us how to do our business, whether it's on health care, immigration, environment, or what have you. Aren't you sympathetic to the idea that we as a state should determine our own course, not listen to the federal government?
Well, let me, I'll tell you about a meeting I had with Cindy Mann, who is the top person at the Obama administration. I sat down face to face with her for an hour and listed out everything I'd heard so far that our leaders in the state wanted, like co-pays, et cetera. And she said done, and had her people there working with our people on that. When I got to personal responsibility, she said, well, that's a slogan. Give me something, that we can discuss. And I said, well, I don't have anything else to discuss except for, they want a block grant. And we began to, I think where the meeting place is, you talked about the Medicaid waiver 1115 that we have now. Waiver is a form of local control. It's a waiver from the rules so that you can manage things uniquely to your population. And what we need to be talking about when the people that are talking about block grant, I'll take them at their word that they want to cover this population if they got the block grant. So let's talk to our federal counterparts about how we would do that and see if we could craft a system.
Right.
And that's what we're missing here. It's hard to have a negotiation where one side takes the unreasonable position that they'll fund 100% for the first 3 years and 90% thereafter, and will work with you on any reasonable request, and the other side won't talk to them. It's just, we've got to find a way to get these federal people to be more reasonable. I think that's but no, we've got to get into that dialogue. Maybe that happens after session, because of what I would agree with what Ed said about there not being any competitive elections. And we all do it when we are the majority party. We redistrict in such a way to create these safe districts so that our leadership's main problem is my party's from your left flank, and in his party's from your right flank. It's easier to get things done after a session. And that is a bad system. At the core of all this, we've got to find some way to have competitive districts.
Judge, I'll give you the last word, then we'll take questions.
Okay, I think the legislature anticipates that we are going to do some form of Medicaid expansion.
Well, they seem to for about 5 minutes. Where's Eddie? They seemed to do it, and then they came back and they went, oh, wait a minute, we can't actually do this.
But that was the House, but it's my understanding that same provision's already in the Senate version.
Right.
So it'll happen. Let me give you, to sort of tie it to transportation, I started to say a lesser important issue, but when I was in the legislature, one of the big debates was the federal government said, you've got to mandate seatbelt use. And Texans said, no, we're not going to do that. And they said, okay, we're not going to give you any highway funds. We said, okay, we'll do that. So think about that today. That's not even controversial.
So the federal government says they're going to put us in timeout, then we're going to be willing to compromise.
Well, I just think we're not going to leave billions of dollars on the table.
You think at the end of the day. All right. Aren't public-private partnerships the way that we do everything these days? And isn't this likely to be a part of the solution?
Yes, but I'd float another solution, and that's something that I've talked to Phil Wilson and Jeff Austin about, and the folks at TxDOT and the folks at our local RTC. And that's what I call the public first partnership. And going back to where that bus crashed, that little 2-mile segment of road, what I'd like to look at is where we get the money off the sidelines. Like, for instance, Dallas County, we're double AAA bond rated. And so we have tremendous bond capacity. And we rarely go to the bond market. And when we do, we get money at historic lows. So you look at that little 2-mile area, and we can save lives, as was illustrated yesterday. But also, we know we can make money because we've got models on both sides with this toll road.
Yep.
So my suggestion is what we begin to look at doing is find ways to let our public entities, first our subdivisions that own the land around the roads, but the UT system and all others, to get off the sidelines first and take a look at being investors in that. In that financial opportunity. Now, there's still a huge role in that for Centra and for others because it is such we lack the will, or whatever you want to call it, to do the things that are the pay-as-you-go.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a role for our private partners, but I think we need to engage our bond capacity at the local level in ways that pay our taxpayers back. I would be interested, I'm looking at 2 projects right now, that project and a waterline project to our inland port area where we get our money back, and I'd be careful how we say this, but we get the cost of our capital back, where it continues to generate money that flows to our taxpayers that they can use for other needs in the future after we get paid back.
Judge, what about public-private?
Well, clearly the high-speed rail we were talking about earlier is a classic example of Japan Railway comes over and frankly, I think the tsunami probably delayed that, unfortunately. But now we're looking at, again, as I talked about today, on the private rail, and as Roger Nober from BNSF said, private railroads used to want to have nothing to do with the public. You know, we own the tracks, you stay away, we've got our own police force, you know, everything. Now they're willing to talk, and so I think that is going to be a key part of it. But I've been in all those cities, and it is a little frustrating, but it's just the way we develop versus them. You know, I mentioned Intercontinental Airport not having rail access. We're not going to for a long, long time. That's one where, you know, Dallas, Fort Worth's going to be way ahead of us.
That's right. The statewide level, do we have the guts? And are we going to have the opportunity at the local level? There have been a couple of attempts for local control, for communities to have the chance to go up or down on raising taxes to support some of these projects. Been pushed back against that. So do we have the guts? In the end, that's a good place to stop, because at the end of the day, as we said, money does make a difference here. So do we have the guts, Judge?
Well, no, the real answer is, do you have the guts? Because until you start making politicians pay for bad decisions, even if they can say, look at me, I'm a conservative, if it's the wrong decision, to me, being a conservative is not holding on to what you have, it's making sure that your future's secure. And we're not doing that right now as conservatives in the state of Texas.
Yeah. Sure.
Judge, do you see evidence that we have at the state or local level the
I'll
guts?
give you two examples of it in the last 2 years in my backyard. The legislature looked at sunsetting NTTA. We said that's our local entity of our 4 counties. The 4 county judges got together. We did a search. We found Alvarez and Marsal. They came up with 80. They did a top-down look at management.
Yep.
Some people lost their jobs, which I hear about a lot from folks, but some people lost their jobs, but they put in place 87 recommendations. Legislature's not mad anymore. Public's a lot happier with that. That's an example of local. The second TRIZ that was ever done was done by us on Loop 9, and that is a transportation reinvestment zone where we have skin in the game in the county to build Loop 9, which loops around the southern part of our county and opens up our inland port area. So yes, there's plenty of evidence that we'll do that, but we don't want a situation, and I don't think Jeff is asking for this, we can't have a situation, we'll have a situation where we're partner, but we can't have a situation where the can keeps getting kicked down to us, because we've got other core responsibilities. I'll say this one thing about, because the questioner and also Phil Wilson, I don't know if Phil's here, I think the best thing we have going for us, or two of the best things we have going for us in transportation, are Jeff Austin and Phil Wilson, because they bring a Lyceum mindset to TxDOT. And this is no smash on TxDOT. TxDOT's a good, solid agency, but that's always been a road building engineering agency. And these guys bring that Lyceum why and what if mindset there. And they've been able to do some phenomenal things, and they're good to work with.
All right. Well, always good to end with some positive Lyceum comments, right, Colin? That's it. I want to thank you guys, Judge Emmett and Judge Jenkins, for joining us today, and thanks all of you for listening. Let's give them a hand.